Hi, thank you for tuning in for another dose of virtual vitamin Z. My name is Akilah, educator with the Detroit Zoological Society, and today we're going to be talking about endangered species and celebrating them today. So, what does it mean to be an endangered species, you ask? So, we'll be taking a closer look at that today. Before we continue, I'd like to say thank you so much to our amazing viewers out there for continuously sharing our work and sharing the stories of the animals that we're bringing to you from the Detroit Zoo. I implore you to ask questions and leave some comments, maybe some topics that you may be interested in. I can't promise you that we'll get to all of your topics but we can sure try. So, let's talk about some of the concepts and skills we're going to be covering today. We're going to be looking at endangered species, literacy, creative expression, building empathy, and science reasoning. Some of the vocabulary we're going to be covering is endangered, extinction, poaching, and species survival plan. So, can you think of the second largest land mammal to the elephant? If you said the rhinoceros, you're absolutely correct. These are the second largest land mammals and only smaller than the elephant is the southern white rhinoceroses. Jasiri and Tumba were the first of the species to find their home at the Detroit Zoo in 2015 and have been grazing their African grasslands habitat ever since at the Detroit Zoo. Unfortunately, the southern white rhino has become endangered in the wild due to poaching for their horns and destruction. So poaching is the illegal hunting of a specific animal. And sometimes that can lead to their endangerment. And then after they become endangered, if they don't have any conservation plans for them or any species survival plans, they can become extinct in the wild, meaning that we won't see them ever again. So, I'd like to share a story with you of one of our smaller animals at the Detroit Zoo. Like every animal and every being on this earth, it has an origin story. Now, this origin story begins for this animal in Tahiti. And if you're familiar with our wildlife interpretive gallery at the Detroit Zoo, where our free flight aviary is and the butterfly garden, you may have seen this exhibit before. And this right here is the portulid snail. Now, the portulid snail is definitely not this huge. We wanted to blow it up to give you an idea of the size and all the amazing characteristics on this little animal. This is the actual size of the portulid snail. It's a little bit smaller than the size of a dime. The portulid snail diversity was lost to an attempt at biological control, which is the control of a species by the introduction of a natural enemy or predator. In this case, it was the African snail, and it was this predator. However, some of these African snails escaped. They bred very rapidly and began eating farmers' crops, threatening the local economy in Tahiti. To control the African snails, the Florida rosy wolf snail was introduced almost a decade later. But the Florida rosy wolf snail preferred to eat the portulid snail, which caused the extinction of many of the portulid species. So their story begins a little bit over 30 years ago, when the DZS began the breeding of the portulid nodosa native to the Tahitian land. The Detroit Zoo began with 26 snails. And this is what 26 snails looks like. And they wanted to ensure a successful release in the wild one day. So 100 of the portulid nodosa snails were bred at the Detroit Zoo and were released in Tahiti in the summer of 2015, and another 60 snails were released in 2016. In 2018, an additional 80 snails were sent to the Netherlands for an eventual release to Tahiti, effectively restoring a population that was extinct in the wild. The DZS now maintains a colony of the portulid nodosa snail in a carefully controlled environment for future releases. With the sufficient growth of the captive population and the establishment of a protected area on Tahiti, this species is considered to officially be on the road to recovery. So currently there are about 6,000 throughout the North American zoos. And they're all descendants of the first 26 that came to the Detroit Zoo. So now I have an activity that I'd like to share with you. And with this activity, it's going to take a little bit of research. You're going to have to do some research on some endangered species. And you can find some of that information at worldwildlifefund.org. That's worldwildlifefund.org. World, W-O-R-L-D, wildlife, W-I-L-D-L-I-F-E, fund, F-U-N-D.org. So you're going to have to do a little bit of research on some of these endangered species. Find one that speaks to you. You're going to be doing a story from their perspective. You're going to be creating a mask. So you're going to first do some research, find what animal speaks to you, create a mask, and then you're going to be writing a story from its perspective. So some materials that you need for that activity will be things that inspire you to create a mask in your house. Maybe it's a paper plate. Maybe you find some crayons or colored pencils and markers. You can use some scrap fabric or scrap paper that you have laying around, glue and or tape. So I do have a writing prompt for you, just in case you get a little bit stuck. But this right here was my southern white rhinoceros. I know it looks a little bit like an elephant because it's gray, but I found a paper plate in my home that I was able to use, and I had a plastic bag that I don't use anymore, and I found that it was gray. So I was a little limited on my supplies, and that's okay if you are. It's your opportunity to get creative and show some of that creative expression. Show what you can do. So what you're going to do, you're going to create your mask first, and then you're going to create the story. So remember how I talked about you're going to do a little bit of their backstory. You're going to talk about where they came from and what happened to them to become endangered. And you're going to brainstorm some of those things. And I have a prompt to show you, to share with you, just in case you get a little bit stuck. So you're going to start with when I lived, every day. Like I said before, you're going to brainstorm an action to support this animal and what changed for the species. You can talk about what that animal saw, smelled, or heard, and now how are they living. So I would like to share a story with you that I created for the southern white rhinoceroses. When I lived in Kenya, every day I roamed the land with my crash. We galloped in open green grasslands. I saw my habitat lose tons of trees. I wasn't sure where my friends had gone, but I knew I didn't see them anymore. Word got around. The African grasslands that conservationists in the area and all over the world wanted to help the habitat I once called my home. They began to plant trees. Familiar sounds of the Kenya grasslands grew louder and louder as time passed and the trees grew. Now I sit in the shade with new friends, some who look like me, a huge rhinoceros, and some that don't. They claim they are larger than me, and they call themselves elephants. So that was my story that I wrote from the southern white rhinoceros perspective. I challenge you to do the same. You can share your mask and your stories at education@dzs.org. That's education@dzs.org. And we'll be featuring some of those masks and some of those stories next week. And that's how you can support Endangered Species Day. So the Detroit Zoological Society supports many species survival plans. And a species survival plan is the population management program. It's the population management program and conservation program that establishes and looks after certain species. We also collaborate with other accredited associations. We also collaborate with other institutions through our Association of Zoos and Aquariums to collaborate on some of those species survival plans. By your continued support, we're able to make a huge impact and a huge difference in celebrating and saving wildlife. So, just to recap, we talked about how you can build empathy by creating a story from the perspective of these endangered species. We're building reverence and respect for these animals that are around us. You may not see these animals on a regular basis, but it can also pour into some of the wildlife that's in our own backyards. I want to say thank you again for joining me for Endangered Species Day. You guys are always amazing. Make sure you tune in for more doses of virtual vitamin Z. If you would like to get the updates, make sure you like, share, and follow the Detroit Zoo's page so you can get those notifications. Thank you so much for joining me, and take care.